Number 10. Patton Parnell vs Morin. This one goes down pretty quickly in the comics, but we also get a lot of time to get attached, or afraid more like, of Patton Parnell before he meets his end, at least. Patton Parnell is an alternate of Spider-Man, but he couldn't be introduced at a worse time in the comics, in terms of his own self-preservation. He is introduced at a time when Morin and the Inheritors are running rampant across the multiverse, killing spider totems. As such, just when Parnell's story seems to be reaching its horrifying conclusion, with him becoming a spider-human monster hybrid and chasing after the girl of his dreams who he seems to now be inclined to possibly murder horribly, Morin shows up. And he does what he does best, kill this spider totem, making Patton Parnell's story very short-lived. Which is good for his neighbor Sarah Jane in the moment, but unfortunate for us readers, as he was a super creepy villainous Spider-Man alternate, and personally I loved him. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, please click that subscribe. Do it, do it, do it! Number 9. Joker vs Red Skull. Oddly enough, despite being from two very different worlds, these two fought one another in the comic Batman and Captain America, a joint comic venture from both Marvel and DC, written by and with inks by John Byrne. While Batman and Captain America teamed up in the comics, also swapping sidekicks, so do their enemies, the Joker and Red Skull. However, when the Joker learns of Red Skull's bizarre patriotism and ideology, he swears to fight against him. On learning of the Skull's allegiance and Red Skull's offer for Joker to join him and his people, Joker responds by stating, "I may be a criminal lunatic, but I'm an American criminal lunatic." Despite his strong stance against the Red Skull and what he represents, however, Joker is pretty easily defeated here in this fight, being knocked out by one of Skull's goons before being dragged onto the plane to be taken back to Germany. Of course, they never do make it there, and Joker gets the last laugh in the end. Well, really the heroes get the last laugh in the end, but like many fights involving the standard Joker, this one against Red Skull is fairly one-sided. Number 8. Green Goblin vs Sin Eater. I think the really cool thing about this fight is that in defeating Norman Osborn, Sin Eater also freed him. For Sin Eater, defeating a villain usually has to do with absolving them of their sin, which was exactly what happened here when Sin Eater finally caught up to Norman Osborn. Taking his gun, he fired and shot Norman directly, thereby removing his sin from him. Norman begged and pleaded to not be absolved because he claimed he wanted to beat his own demons by himself, but it turns out that this was likely not really Norman talking but the Green Goblin, who probably was just pleading to try and maintain his sense of evil.
Number 7. Joker vs Simon. Yes, it is the Joker again, and guess what? He will appear later on as well. But I also hear you asking, Adam, who the heck is Simon? Exactly. That's my point. You think that the infamous Joker is going to fall to a guy named Simon, who most people haven't even heard of? Simon is a villain of the Teen Titans who has vast telekinesis and telepathic powers, and he is also the leader of the Fearsome Five. But in Salvation Run number 2, he is a member of the new Injustice League when a bunch of villains get exiled to an alien world. He attempts to convince his fellow supervillains that escape is impossible, and then proceeds to lay down plans for beginning a new civilization, only to be very abruptly interrupted by the Joker, who runs up and smashes Simon's brain in with a rock repeatedly. Like I said, it was very abrupt.
Number 6. Dr. Doom vs Morgan Le Fay. Doom is often one who believes he is more powerful than all, and in most cases, he's usually right, possessing a brilliant mind and extremely powerful will, and also being skilled in the use of magic. However, even with being a former student of Morgan Le Fay's, even his magic prowess is no match for her own. When Morgan learns that in the future her student and lover Victor will betray her, she decides to strike first. She travels through time to kill him, and although he attempts to stand against her, she very nearly succeeds in defeating him for good. But even though the Dark Avengers do come to stop her, the initial battle here is quick and painful for Doom before he ends up being rescued. Number 5. Marvel Universe vs the Progenitor. This one was quite the doozy. Remember how we were talking about AXE? Well, doesn't end with Druig unleashing Uranos. Although Uranos plays a key role and is a massive threat in this story, he isn't even the main antagonist here. That role is actually taken by the Progenitor. The Progenitor is the Rebel Eternals' response to Druig's reign and his attack on mutants. They decide the best way to stop him is to resurrect a Celestial, creating their own version of one of the cosmic gods, and giving it a moral system which would actually help the Celestial to see their side of the argument, thereby defeating and deposing Druig. This, however, does not work out as planned. With the help of the Avengers and mutant geneticist Mr. Sinister, the Eternals create their god god, but it turns out that the progenitor is less interested in judging solely Druig and more interested in judging all of Earth. And if found lacking, the progenitor promises that within 24 hours, Earth will be destroyed as a result. And after the 24 hours are up, and it does indeed judge Earth to be unworthy, it begins to deliver on its promise, killing many of Marvel's most prominent and most powerful heroes. Number 4. Ishmael Gregor vs Black Adam. This one comes to us from the recent DC film released exclusively in theaters, Black Adam. The initial fight between these two characters is a fast and brutal one, thanks to Black Adam's rage. In this world, Black Adam is more pitched as an anti-hero, but in the comics, he has been known as a straight-up villain before. Although right now, I would say in the comics, he's also more of an anti-hero, so kinda makes sense. Still, even in the DCEU, this is a guy who has god-tier powers and who just straight up kills people who get in his way. In the case of Ishmael Gregor, he is the descendant of Black Adam's oldest enemy, the King of Kahndaq, who once oppressed his own people in search of greatness. When Ishmael seems to be trying to follow in his ancestors' footsteps and also kidnaps the son of Adriana Tomaz, Amon, both of whom are Teth Adam's allies, Black Adam loses it, emitting a powerful blast of electric energy that defeats Ishmael instantly. While this defeat is swift, it turns out that it's not permanent, however, as this may have been part of Ishmael's plan all along.
Number 3. Batman Who Laughs vs Perpetua. Remember how I said Joker would be showing up again? Well, I kinda half lied. It's actually a Jokerized Batman, which is taking two of the arguably most popular DC hero and villain combos and mashing them together. Who can stand in the way of that? Also, to call this fight one-sided is a little debatable, but the Batman Who Laughs rose from being just a man to becoming a multiversal level threat very quickly after he gained access to the powers of Dr. Manhattan. This level of power allowed him to face and defeat Perpetua, one of, if not the, most powerful god in DC Comics, who is mother of the multiverse. He became the nightmare of one of the most powerful beings in all of DC Comics, sealing her away within fragments of the Source Wall.
Number 2. Joker vs Poison Ivy. One of the most brutal fights in comics comes unsurprisingly from the world of Injustice, though more specifically we're talking about Injustice Year Zero, issue number 8. Here Poison Ivy pays the Joker a visit to get revenge for the years of mistreatment towards his then ex, Harley Quinn. Ivy is inspired to do this after Harley reveals that she secretly had his daughter, and Ivy warns the Joker that if he ever hurts Harley again, she'll kill him. Despite the Joker threatening Ivy throughout this fight, it's very clear who has the real power between the two of them here. Number 1. Geist vs Magneto. Geist vs Magneto has to be one of my favorite all-time short-lived and brutal villain versus villain fights. Though really, between them, it's pretty apparent that Geist is the real villain here, I think. Magneto ends up doing his best to catch Geist and runs into him after he escapes punishment in Terra Verde in the late 80s Wolverine series. Magneto lures Geist out with a little mechanical toy and makes short work of him. While his fate isn't explicitly shown on panel, considering that Geist is a cyborg and Magneto is the master of magnetism, we can imagine how brutal this fight would be, and based on what we do see of what happens to the decoy robot toy, I think we know what's gonna happen there.
Kicking off the list at number 10. Wolverine vs Hulk. This one is wild, okay? We all know Wolverine is ripped, and he gets really ripped in this one. And I don't mean ripped like jacked either, I mean ripped like in half. This one comes from Wolverine vs Hulk, and it's more than brutal. So in this story, Wolverine is sent to Tibet to assassinate the Hulk. The problem is, he's the Incredible Hulk, so it may sound easier than it looks. So when the battle between these two started up, it's loud, it's messy, and it's going to be pretty violent. Hulk picked Wolverine up and literally broke him into two, tossing his lower half up a mountain and leaving Wolverine's torso bleeding in the snow down below. Just another day in the Ultimates, you know? Being the world's greatest tracker and all, Wolverine smelt his legs that were a few miles up the mountain and then did a really slow, really painful climb to get those smelly feet back where they belong. The series was actually delayed in real life, so this journey up the mountain to get his legs back took 3 years for readers to finally see. Imagine if you had to wait that long to see the next episode after like a Breaking Bad finale or something. 3 years? That's insane. I couldn't do it. And before we head over to number 9, guys, if you wanted to go ahead and give us a thumbs up for this video, that would be great. It helps out the studio a lot. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now let's dive back into this list. Number 9, Batman vs Bane. Directed by, of course, Christopher Nolan, who had done the previous installments, comes a pretty epic conclusion to the Dark Knight trilogy. Released in 2012, The Dark Knight Rises, as you can guess from the title alone, is about Batman rising up. From where? Why? What's going on? Well, how about a broken back thanks to Bane? So this is 8 years after the Joker had a run-in with Gotham City. So now Batman has returned to take down Tom Hardy as he mumbles and frowns aggressively in this film. We get one of my favorite fight scenes from any superhero movie. And what I love about this scene so much is that there's no music to it at all. All you hear is Batman legitimately struggling to try and fight this dude. And it makes it more realistic. It's stressful, and you can see Bruce become more and more exhausted by each punch. And it all comes to a screeching halt when Bane picks up Bruce for one last blow, right to the spinal cord.
Spirit! Oh, your buddy!
Now, I know people like to give this movie a hard time, but seeing Batman get his ass kicked like this reminds me that it's not always the hero that gets the last punch. Number 8, Magneto vs Wolverine. Look, I'll be honest, I'm a nail biter, okay? And there's days where I can't even muster up the strength to pull a hangnail out of my own finger or whatever. It sucks, I can't deal with pain, especially when something's coming out of my body, which makes the next one on this list really brutal for me to read. Now, I couldn't imagine if all my bones were suddenly ripped out of my body. That's a nightmare. And that's exactly what happens to Wolverine when Magneto has had enough of his nonsense. Yeah, this all takes place during the Fatal Attractions event. So Wolverine doesn't even have a chance to scream. The adamantium that bonded to his bones erupted outwards like water bursting through a dam. And he's still breathing when this happens. I mean, if this isn't one of the worst things to go through, I couldn't tell you what is. Definitely not one of my hangnails. This one is probably a little bit more painful. Thankfully, Xavier wiped Magneto's memory of the whole event, and Wolverine was out of commission for a while recovering. I mean, he had mental spikes sticking out of his body. I don't think he's gonna get any chores done in the meantime.
Number 7, Black Canary versus Superman. Pretty much any Injustice fight against Superman is brutal because of how powerful Superman is known for being, and of course how crazed and evil he is here. Black Canary attempts to take down the big bad Superman in Injustice, and at least she came armed with a gun and a kryptonite bullet to do so. Still, this fight ends how you'd expect it to, with Black Canary being no match for the Man of Steel. Well, almost anyways. She successfully shoots him, taking him out momentarily, but he is then chosen as a Yellow Lantern because of his immense ability to instill fear in others, which honestly I agree. Although she may be taken out by Superman's heat vision right after that with a shot straight to the gut, she does still end up getting a different kind of victory through her defeat. A consolation prize at least. She's wearing contacts that have the ability to record everything she sees, allowing people to see just how much of a brutal tyrant Superman has become, because they broadcast it everywhere. Also, I feel like if you actually put in contacts that had cameras in them, even in the future, even if like the technology was amazing, they still have to be pretty thick. Like, I have a hard enough trouble putting regular contacts in my eyes on days when I have to do that. Number 6, Hawkgirl vs Barbastos. Granted, this was Nth Metal Enhanced Hawkgirl, but still, if you had told me this was how Dark Knight's metal was going to go down, I wouldn't have believed you. In the end, Hawkgirl was the one to defeat Barbastos in the comic. Though of course, that wouldn't be completely where that story would end, as we saw with the continuation in Dark Knight's Death Metal. However brief the fight between Hawkgirl and the Bat God was, it was still pretty cool that she was the one who ended up taking him down. Even if it was only because of, well, the Element X blade that she was really able to do this. Barbados is basically a god, so on paper this fight in general just sounds pretty crazy.
In at number 5, Daredevil vs the Fantastic Four. Now we must give credit where credit is due. Daredevil certainly put up a valiant effort, but ultimately this was a 4-on-1 bout. The Fantastic Four are among the most powerful heroes in the Marvel Universe, and Daredevil is a blind lawyer. Well, he can also do karate, but he has to be extra crafty when it comes to planning his attacks. In the 1968 comic book The Flames of Battle, Daredevil decided to attack the Four Freedoms Plaza, and I gotta say, he was pretty successful. I mean, he somehow fooled the Human Torch into knocking over a water tower, and then he was able to get Mr. Fantastic to attack the thing by accident. Originally, when Jack Kirby had drawn Daredevil just beating the crap out of the thing, Stan Lee had to step in and say that it made absolutely no sense, which is why we saw Lee writing in a part of the story that sees Daredevil getting Reed Richards to accidentally hit the thing with a nerve blast ray. Although the humor in how weak the Daredevil character is in comparison still resides in those thought bubbles. Right after the thing is blasted, Daredevil stands back and thinks to himself, it wasn't my kick that stopped him. Probably not the best idea to be a superhero with low self-esteem, but there it is. Coming in at number 4, Batman vs Guy Gardner. Next up, we have the master billionaire detective again against the Green Lantern Guy Gardner. Gardner is wielding one of the most powerful weapons in the universe, but in 1987, this was somehow no match for Batman's money, punches, and cool technology. During the Justice League International number 5, Guy Gardner's lips were flapping as per usual, and so his big mouth got a big punch from Batman. In theory, Gardner should be more than capable of taking out Batman, but due to his extreme arrogance, he removed his power ring right before taking a swing at the Dark Knight. The removal of his ring automatically makes this an unfair fight for Guy Gardner, and in comparison to the big villains Batman has taken down, he makes quick work of Guy in this fight. Coming in at number 3, Star Fox vs the Incredible Hulk. During the Incredible Hulk number 300, Bruce Banner is hulking out as per usual, except in doing so, he begins to completely demolish New York City. Now the Hulk is required to be doing this, and yet despite him laying down his big green punches, most of the Marvel squad seems pretty concerned. Now if any fellow hero was deserving of a beatdown for trying to stop the Hulk, it's Star Fox. And I have a feeling the rest of the Avengers would agree because he's notoriously one of the creepiest comic book characters of all time. Star Fox decides that the way he's going to soothe the Hulk is by using his special ability to emit waves of erotic pleasure. Now I don't claim to be a genius, but I'm fairly certain you can't take down the Hulk with waves of pleasure. Even if you could, how do you expect that to end gracefully? Thankfully, the Hulk was able to knock some sense into Star Fox and hit him with one of the hardest punches he's probably ever felt in his life. It was an extremely one-sided interaction that definitely made Star Fox rethink his approach. Coming in number 2, Dazzler vs Dr. Doom. This one is just sad. Not only does Dazzler lose this fight, but she does so in her own comic book. We're not sure what the writers were thinking when they made Dazzler because her powers are definitely not what one would expect to see from a superhero. Dazzler rocks a shiny outfit with a deep neckline and can convert sound into light, plus she wears roller skates. Well, she can skate really fast. I mean, it seems more like the resume of a DJ, but okay. Somehow the writers find a way to make sense of this hero attacking Dr. Doom, and her big plan is even more sad to watch play out. You see, Dazzler's dazzling plan to kill one of the most powerful supervillains of all time was to just skate at him really fast. That's like an astronaut saying, in order to reach the moon, I will now be climbing the world's largest ladder. Dazzler tries to hit him with her light show after this, but Dr. Doom just ultimately ends up electrocuting the entire room and capturing her until the Fantastic Four can arrive to save her. Coming in at number 1, Spider-Man vs the Sinister Six. Spider-Man is a kid with superpowers that has to experience puberty and bullying all at the same time, so there's no question that he's well versed when it comes to adversity, and supervillains are constantly adding to this pressure for him to remain on his toes at all times. However, even the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man can become overwhelmed from time to time. For example, when Dr. Octopus got the Sinister Six back together, they were fresh out of prison and had a lineup that featured the Hobgoblin and a new Sandman. Safe to say that if it weren't for Doc Ock's own ego and Spidey's superpowered friends, his days could have easily been numbered by the Sinister Six.
Number 10, Squirrel Girl vs Dr. Doom. When Squirrel Girl was new on the scene, she was still weirdly proving how OP of a character she was. Although any fight involving Squirrel Girl you would think would be super unfair in terms of her being completely outmatched. And you'd be right about these fights being unfair, but it's usually more often the other way around, with many of her opponents standing no chance against her. One of her first fights happened to go just like that, featuring the brilliant and dangerous Dr. Doom, who found himself quickly trounced by Squirrel Girl when she attacked him with squirrels, leaving him to be pretty much embarrassed about this fight forever onward. Number 9, Captain America vs the Punisher. This was a very one-sided fight, not only on paper, but also just in terms of how this all went down. Two villains, Goldbug and Plunderer, were willing to join Captain America's side of the fight in Civil War, revealing that even the supervillain community was concerned about what would happen if Iron Man won. They might be villains, but they were people too, and were terrified at the prospect of the nation becoming a police state. Punisher didn't like the idea of working with villains though, and shot down their offer by literally gunning them down. This resulted in a pissed off Cap beginning a brutal fight with Frank, who refused to fight back because, well, Captain America was one of the good guys? So based on how this fight shook out, I don't know if you'd actually be able to tell. Captain America beats the Punisher within an inch of his life over the course of a handful of panels, and also calls him a murderous piece of trash. Wow, that is pretty brutal, Cap. Alright friends, before we move on to this next point, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying it. It really does help us out here at the channel. Number 8, the Punisher vs Dawan. In this fight, Punisher once again is brutally
brutally defeated by his opponent, though this time a lot more permanently. Punisher ends up being no match for Dawan, who makes quick work of him despite all his guns. I mean, we already knew this was how it was going to end, didn't we? Considering Dawan takes after his dad, Logan, and has a pretty intense healing factor. The real impressive thing though is just how much of a beating and stabbing Frank withstands before Dawan inevitably takes the victory. In the end, Dawan decapitates Frank Castle, killing him, though Frank of course would later come back as the monster Frankencastle and then later be returned to his old self once again.
Number 7, the Avengers vs Thanos. The Russo brothers came in the MCU with the Winter Soldier, and we got that sick, awesome elevator scene, and then we got Civil War. They make some pretty fun movies. My personal favorite of the bunch is still Infinity War. I mean, all these characters who led their own franchise crammed into one single movie shouldn't have worked out as well as it did. It's a smooth flick. So we see Thanos as he walks his way through the universe collecting the cosmic Infinity Stones. First, he decimates Xandar for the Power Stone, gave Loki the old 1-2 choke for the Space Stone, and then he punched the Hulk so hard in the neck that he quit being the Hulk. And this is like the first 10 minutes of the movie. So the movie itself is a brutal fight, but of course it comes down to the last stone, the last attempt. The Mind Stone. The stone that is Vision. It's in his forehead. So after a last effort attempt of removing the stone in Wakanda, Wanda Maximoff is forced to destroy it. So while she's working on that, all of our Avengers are getting destroyed by the powers that Thanos now obtains, but they don't come out on top in this one. Vision gets that big yellow blackhead pulled right out of his forehead, and then the theater sat silent, and we just watched Vision's lifeless and colorless body fall to the ground. Seeing the Avengers lose like this, especially Vision, was definitely one of the more brutal beatdowns in an MCU movie. Number 6, Null vs Thor. Spoilers coming in hot for King in Black by Donny Cates, okay, just so you guys are aware. So during the first battle with Null and his army of symbiotes, Thor was not to be found. The God of Thunder would be a perfect fight considering the weakness of the Horde being electricity and magic. Kinda makes sense. He'd be a pretty reliable chess piece to this violent game, no doubt about it. So when the God of Thunder finally arrived in issue 3 of King in Black, he brought a pretty epic battle with him. So Null had come to Earth with his thousands of symbiote dragons searching for Eddie Brock's son, Dylan. Searching for you, Dylan, they're coming, man. And when he finally got a hold of Eddie, he stripped him of the symbiote and dropped him from the Empire State Building. Things are looking not so great. And then Thor returns finally in the next issue. So you're a god and a king, Thor asks. Good for you. Now allow me to teach you what those words truly mean. And he does just that. Of course, with the help of Tony riding in on an extremis infected symbiote, it's just another week and a bit and we'll see this epic battle continue with issue 4. But so far, it's up to a crazy, crazy awesome start. Number 5, Spider-Man and the Red Goblin. The Red Goblin. It's a mix between the Green Goblin and Carnage. I mean, you have a combination of two of the most powerful bad guys ever against Peter. He shouldn't have won this, I don't think. Let me explain. Appearing in the Amazing Spider-Man 798, this all came to life after Norman Osborn stole the Carnage symbiote, and after that, all hell just broke loose. He created this monster. So Norman used the Carnage symbiote to eject all the nanites, but then that ended up creating this monster mashup becoming the Red Goblin. It was like a science experiment that made things worse for everyone, but better for him almost. So the rare weaknesses that the symbiote did have went away once the two had merged, making him like unstoppable. Peter Parker for sure should have lost this battle. I mean, he's so overpowered here. I mean, even the bombs that he throws at Spider-Man are upgraded versions of his own bombs. This time around, the bombs are red Carnage bombs that Pete can't even sense. It's all fused together and it's really intimidating. It's very scary. So Pete seems to agree by his choice of words. Peter admits a few pages later after he retreats that he couldn't last 3 minutes in the ring with him. Yeah, I agree. The readers are like, absolutely. You're absolutely right. The final issue had Peter get the upper hand on Osborn by mind games? Yeah, he explains how Carnage will get all the glory here in this defeat of Spider-Man and not Norman Osborn. I mean, ego is a great place to attack. If it works, it works. So when he becomes Norman Osborn again, the fight is manageable now, and Spider-Man can come out on top. Now, as great as this is, I really don't think it would be this easy to turn the tides. Not after seeing Carnage bombs. Get out of here, no way. Number 4, Batman and the Hulk. Yep, you heard me. So back in the late 70s, Marvel and DC came together for a handful of crossovers. One of these crossovers featured a battle with the Incredible Hulk and Batman. There have been many conversations about who would win in a fight between Iron Man and Batman. If you're a fan of this page, odds are you've had this talk with your friends, because they're both humans who rely on their brains and brawn to get by, kind of even. Personally, I'd pick Batman to win that fight any day. But the Hulk, No chance. Batman vs. the Hulk, issue 27 of DC Comics Special Series. So we have Batman and the Joker trying to control the Green Giant. And when the Hulk gets his hands on Batman, well, that should have been the end for sure. Even Batman said he felt like his spine was going to snap like a pencil. And believe me, if anybody knows what that feels like, it's definitely Batman. So he gets out of his grasp by a nice double ear smack, and then he finishes him off by using some sleeping gas from his belt, followed by a nice flying kick. Now, it's great to see Batman use his skills to take down the Beast. That's what he's good at. Unfortunately, I don't think any fight between them would ever last long enough to give him the chance to do so, especially if he has him in his hands. He would be dead. Number 3, Iron Man and Magneto. Now, when I say that, your first thought probably is, well, of course Magneto would win a fight fighting a guy in a metal suit, but this wasn't the case during an X-Men vs Avengers storyline. If you think this is a no contest, you've never met Tony Stark. So Stark gets buried by Magneto under 200 tons of rubble, because even though Tony's suit at this point was made of carbon nanotubes, the island that he was fighting on was made of metal. So step 2 was for Tony to release a swarm of high-tech magnets to try and throw him off his game a little bit. This of course didn't work. You're giving magnets to Magneto, you know? So Magneto tried reaching out to the cosmos to channel power from other planets, but in doing so, he sensed a disruption in the form of the Phoenix Force. So while he was distracted there, Tony took this as an opening and knocked him out. Now, as fun as this was, and it led to other fun things, it was also highly unlikely that Iron Man will beat Magneto again. If this happened on the big screen, fans would rip it apart, no doubt about it. Number 2, Thor and the Incredible Hulk. Thor Ragnarok is easily one of the best installments in the Infinity Saga. Taika Waititi is returning to the studio to do Thor Love and Thunder, and I can't wait. He's super funny. If you haven't seen What We Do in the Shadows, go watch it out. It's his best work, I'd say. And Jojo Rabbit. He makes good movies. So one of my favorite scenes from the movie is also one that makes fans pretty annoyed. Now, this part in the movie had to happen so the plot can move a certain way, and we got to see a cool battle take place in the meantime, but it's also kind of unrealistic. So the Grandmaster's great champion, of course, ends up being Thor's friend from work, Hulk. Now, he's been there for a while after Sokovia, so he's not the same green guy as they last saw. Thor spent most of the fight getting it handed to him. He was trying to talk to Bruce, trying to calm him down, give him little arm tickles. It wasn't working out until he tapped into his true powers and unleashed a good number of lightning bolts to the face. That ought to do it. So Thor is about to finish off Sakar's champion once and for all until the Grandmaster himself intervened. If only he had replaced that remote for like 2 seconds, this movie would have gone a much different route. Maybe less fun, but probably more honest. And finally, number 1, Old Man Logan and the Hulk. I like the Hulk. He shouldn't really lose anything ever. That's the point I'm getting at. Seeing the Hulk fight Wolverine is something I hope we can see on the big screen in my lifetime. I mean, with all these franchises crossing over soon with WandaVision and stuff, maybe it's sooner than we think, but I doubt it. They have no reason to fight yet. But one of the highlight battles between these two beasts take place in Old Man Logan. Now, at the end of the story, Logan went back to finish off Hulk Gang, right? Of course. So soon after the Hulk comes out, they start fighting, even throwing cows at one another. Real wild stuff. Funny, gory, scary, loud, you name it. And then he turns into the big green guy, and boy, does it get ugly. So Billy Bob comes in the cave later on and sees just a mess. He sees bodies all over the floor, and then he sees Hulk struggling with some digestion problems. Odd. So then Wolverine literally rips his way out of his stomach, and that's what kills the Hulk. The Hulk should have won this fight for sure. If he didn't make the mistake of eating him, he probably could have done it. Or the Hulk should have healed after the whole Wolverine C-section thing, so the fight should have maybe continued. I mean, for the story to end this way, it was a little disappointing. Well guys, there you have it. Which other superhero defeat do you think the wrong person came out on top? Let us know in the comments. I'd love to hear from them.
Number 10, Batman vs Red Hood. During the story Under the Red Hood, Batman ends up face to face with Red Hood, aka Jason Todd. For years, Jason Todd was thought dead, but at this point it's been revealed that he is in fact alive, and has been for some time. Jason decides to return to Gotham and seek out Batman as the vigilante Red Hood. However, there is a great conflict between the two, with Batman fighting Red Hood during their first encounter and later condemning Jason for his brutal form of justice and his willingness to kill those who stand against him. When Batman attempts to persuade Jason to rejoin him, this has the opposite effect, only turning Jason more towards the darker path. Jason gives Batman an ultimatum: kill the Joker or kill him. You see, Jason wasn't mad that Batman wasn't able to save him years ago, or that he didn't come looking for him after his seeming death. He was mad that the Joker was still alive. alive, with Batman allowing him to go on living, despite what he'd done. Batman refuses, however, to kill Jason or the Joker, instead preventing Jason from shooting the villain. As a result, Jason becomes an enemy of Batman, and a villain in general. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by hitting that subscribe button? Do it, I dare you. Number 9, Guardians of the Globe and Invincible versus Machine Head, Hired Goons, and Battle Beast. This has to be one of the most brutal fights we've seen thus far in the animated series Invincible, though fans of the comics know that this really is just the beginning. Mark Grayson as Invincible hoped to help one of Machine Head's hired goons, Titan, escape his criminal life. However, in the end, he was betrayed by Titan, who only wanted to take his boss's title and position. And Invincible, as well as the Guardians of the Globe, also ended up getting their butts handed to them by Machine Head's hired muscle, Battle Beast, to boot. Which, I mean, fair enough. Battle Beast is nuts. Number 8, the Suicide Squad versus Starro the Conqueror. Because, I mean, come on, you know I gotta do it. You know I gotta do it. Starro the Conqueror is one of the most destructive forces we've seen in the DCEU, and also maybe has one of the saddest stories besides in terms of his origins. That's right, for this one we are pivoting over to the DC Extended Universe, the name for their cinematic universe, and James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. Here, Starro the Conqueror is an alien life form that was basically kidnapped from outer space, brought to Earth, and experimented on by the Thinker. Over time he has grown to be massive and of course quite angry at his captors. When the Suicide Squad are tasked with uncovering the secret of Project Starfish and destroying the base that houses it, they end up freeing Starro, causing mass destruction in Corto Maltese. They defeat Starro in the end, but some of them of course die along the way, and the amount of property damage and casualties as a result of this fight is pretty immense. Number 7, Mephisto vs Khonshu. While Mephisto doesn't end up as being permanently defeated, Khonshu, with his avatar Moon Knight, still manages to kill a hefty number of Mephistos. It turns out there are a bunch of different alternates, so Mephisto is able to just kinda like keep coming, but Khonshu, with stolen powers of the Avengers and the help of Moon Knight, ends up defeating 100 Mephistos in one day, which is wild. That's a lot of Mephistos. One is honestly a lot. And if you're wondering why Khonshu is being considered a villain here, it's because during this story arc, Age of Khonshu, he was actually kind of revealed to be one, acting in the name of justice but really taking over the world himself and then turning it into kind of like his own Egyptian underworld in the name of defeating Mephisto. Number 6, Great Ring of Arakko vs Uranos. This one was pretty brutal for Arakko, and it was a surprisingly quick fight. This all went down during the event Avengers vs X-Men vs Eternals Judgment Day, or AXE for short. With the revelation to the world that the mutants were capable of resurrection, new Prime Eternal Druig realized he could use this information to his advantage, and to strengthen his rule. He decided to label the mutants as deviants, seeing their ability to control life and death as excess deviation. Labeling it as such, he went to war with them, and was even convinced to release eternal criminal Uranos. Uranos is known for being one of the most effective warlords around, removing any and all who basically stand in his path, and eradicating them and whatever race they belong to or world they belong to completely. When Druig unleashes Uranos on Mars, now known as Planet Arakko, the ruling government known as the Great Ring does not stand a chance against them. I feel like within the first 5 or 10 minutes of that fight, they're pretty much defeated as well, which is pretty crazy because they're like all Omega level mutants.
Number 5, Venom vs Sandman. In Peter Parker's Spider-Man Volume 1, number 16, Sandman took to reforming the Sinister Six to go after Spider-Man. Now one of those 6 was Eddie Brock, aka Venom. Being the villain he once was, Venom betrayed Sandman and the two got into a fight. Things quickly take a turn for the violent and chompy as Brock/Venom takes a huge chunk out of Sandman's body, causing Sandy to destabilize and break down, unable to stop himself from dissipating into a nearby storm drain. It's a pretty awful and pretty quick dispatching. Sandman does eventually return, but not as his old self, as the years spent in a kind of ghostly form left him in kind of tatters. Damn Venom.
Number 4, Superman vs the Joker and Harley Quinn. This one definitely ended in major disaster, as it was the event that ended up resulting in the Injustice timeline here. And we all know how that ended up. Awfully. This was a really one-sided fight too, as Superman didn't really stand a chance against the Joker and Harley Quinn's machinations. Which sounds weird to say considering it's Superman, but that's what happened. In this world, they manipulated Superman into thinking that he was fighting Doomsday, when in reality he was actually fighting Lois Lane, you know, his one true love. Discovering only too late what he'd really done, the realization of what they'd made him do basically broke Superman. He would end up killing the Joker in cold blood and turning into a tyrant as a result of this targeted and gross mostly successful attack on Soups and his family. This one comes from a super random place, but is a pretty intense fight between what are likely the two main baddies of the MCU thus far. In the comics Avengers Mech Strike issue number 4, Thanos is brought into this fight to face Kang, who the entire Avengers are basically up against. Unfortunately, despite Thanos' strength and brilliance, even he cannot defeat the Master of Time. All it takes is for Kang to lay his hands on Thanos and force him to experience the power Kang holds over time itself. He ages Thanos rapidly with his touch to the point that Thanos is no more than a skull, which is a creative way to kill him considering that Thanos was boasting of taking Kang's skull for his own trophy following their fight. Kang doesn't even plan to keep Thanos' skull either, tossing it on the ground and saying he doesn't need souvenirs to keep warm memories in his heart. It's kind of a weird thing to say when you kill someone, warm memories, but you know. The Avengers beat him back after this, but it's an impressive show of strength from Kang. Number 2, Captain America vs Iron Man. When these two fought just as the 2015 Secret Wars event was starting up in Avengers issue number 44 during Time Runs Out, it was literally a fight that ended with the destruction of the multiverse. I don't know how much more disastrous that can get. While Captain America and Iron Man weren't the ones behind the destruction of the multiverse, they also weren't doing much to help prevent it at this point either. This fight had been a long time coming at this point, considering all the pent-up frustration and tension that had been growing between these two over the years, especially after the events of Civil War. The thing is, there will always be room in the comics for a fight between Cap and Tony, because, well, they're both so different in terms of their ideologies. Unless I guess we are in the reality of Earth 3490, where Steve Rogers and a female version of Tony named Natasha Stark are actually married. Although, I'm sure even those two fight, right? Marital fights. Number 1, DC Universe vs Perpetua. Perpetua is one of the greatest threats the multiverse has ever faced when it comes to DC Comics. And when our famed heroes first faced her, guess what? They lost. I know, it's shocking. That doesn't usually happen in comics. Perpetua's goal was to reshape the multiverse in her own darker image. After she broke free from the Source Wall, she set out to do just this, with the help of her allies Batman Who Laughs and Barbados. In the end, Perpetua would be defeated, even being betrayed by one of her own, with Batman Who Laughs usurping her and taking her power for himself. But still, the temporary threat of a new world where Perpetua ruled was pretty awful. And for a while, she kinda did win, so yeah.
Coming in at number 10, Superman vs. the Puzzler. There's no doubt that Superman has faced his fair share of hard-fought battles. You know, villains who actually make him work up a sweat at least, and ones that force him to use some of his more stronger powers. However, when the matchup is so unfair, Superman barely has to even try, and on top of that, he did use some of his lamer powers to defeat the Puzzler. The Puzzler that Superman faced here was the female version named Valerie Van Hoften. For years, she had admired Superman, even wanting to become a hero just like him. However, when she was unable to realize this dream, she turned to a life of crime and was eventually hired to kill the man that she once adored. Valerie has this unique ability to break her body down into puzzle pieces, but remember though, unique doesn't always mean powerful. Sure enough, when these two squared off, Superman just straight up tore her to shreds. I mean, that is her power, but if you're going to break into a billion little pieces, you better make sure that your opponent can't punch people into space. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this point, Superman doesn't even really have to try here. He relies on his lamest power, which is super breath. I mean, come on. If you have a lamer power that Superman has, leave me a comment down below. But just like that, the Puzzler is rendered useless from this breath. A cold breath. And then perhaps what's even more humiliating is that on her second time around, she ended up in a trash can. Yeah, very unfair. Coming in at number 9, Captain Boomerang vs. The Flash. This is another one of those fights where you see the villains psyching themselves up for a few pages, but you know that they have absolutely no chance. The Flash, in my opinion, gets overlooked far too often, probably because he isn't exactly a physically intimidating hero, and most of the time the heroes that can punch the hardest usually dominate the fight. But the Flash has superhuman speed, so he could technically kill his enemy before they even have a chance to introduce themselves. That's the delicate balance with the writing in a Flash comic book, and why it's a little bit different from the other ones. They have to walk this fine line between enemies that have the brain of a goldfish and a hero that seems to never remember his strongest power when a fight comes his way. But even so, this fight between Captain Boomerang and the Flash is so ridiculously one-sided. The Flash can outrun bullets, but old Boomerang here, who looks more like a lunch lady, actually thought that he could beat the Flash with a slower projectile that was designed to be returned to him. Then if that wasn't dumb enough, he straps explosives to said boomerangs. Seems like a flawless plan. Would somebody get this guy a Boomerang for Dummies handbook though? Because he's gonna blow himself up. Coming in at number 8, Batman vs Calendar Man. I'm sure that just by hearing the title at this point, you already know how this one's going to go. I'm sorry, but a guy who commits crimes related to the date is just one of the weirdest supervillains and not very smart considering the fact that Batman is a master detective. What's worse about this villain is that he's literally wearing a costume designed to correlate with the date of the crime that he committed, making it even easier to spot him. Due to this, he has become notoriously known as a joke to both heroes and other villains even. This matchup is so unfair that Batman would probably be better off just letting the Gotham Police Department arrest him on their own. Calendar Man is a successful inventor that is capable of designing machinery required for his various schemes, but put that against billionaire Bruce Wayne and there is no question that Batman is going to come out on top every single time. Coming in at number 7, Thunder Punch vs the Transformers. Now remember when I said that most superheroes are just people that punch really hard? Well, sometimes that isn't enough to cut it. And in the case of Thunder Punch, we feel even worse because his punches would probably be better suited for, I don't know, someone his own size. You see, Thunder Punch was one of the Neo Knights, this super team that was hell-bent on destroying the Transformers. Although, they didn't even try to design any new technology to do this. They just thought punching people really hard would be sufficient. I mean, it's worked out for other people, but not this case. Turns out when your opponent is a 4-story tall robot that can turn into a tank, punching him is just not gonna do the trick. The strangest part about Thunder Punch is the lack of logic when facing an enemy this big. The Transformers could step on him and not even notice. What's worse is the design of his costume, which completely exposes his hands. His body is coated in metal and hard fabric, but he chose to not cover up the one thing that he was hitting a robot with. Real smart. Coming in at number 6, Wolverine vs Magneto. Now this one here is deceiving because Wolverine has held his own against some really tough supervillains, but Magneto is, well, Magneto. During the 90s event called Fatal Attractions though, the X-Men were forced to attack Magneto's new asteroid base. Once there, an intense fight takes place where Professor X and Jean are telepathically attacking Magneto while Wolverine wounds him on the physical plane. This ultimately made Magneto really angry, and what followed was perhaps one of the most horrific comic book panels in X-Men history. Because Wolverine's skeleton is made of adamantium, Magneto could manipulate this just enough to rip the metal out of his body. This left Wolverine completely incapacitated and now with large spikes of metal sticking out of his body. His only savior was the fact that Professor X was able to wipe Magneto's memory before he could finish the job.
Number 5, SpiderMan vs Morin. It's all fun and games until somebody gets poked in the eye. Or maybe if you're Spider-Man, it's all fun and games until you get your eye yanked out. Perhaps one of the worst things I can imagine. In the Spider-Man storyline, The Other, Evolve or Die, we see Spider-Man go toe-to-toe with Morin, and he gets his butt kicked. It gets so bad that Spider-Man actually breaks his knuckles while he's trying to fight this dude. That's how intense this battle already is. Things, of course, take a horrible turn for the worse when Morin decides to grab Spider-Man's left eye and then yank. No, he didn't, Spider-Man says. Oh, yes, he did. I said out loud on the bus in front of people. Dude, he pulled his eyeball out, and then to make us feel even more sick than we already do, Morin proceeds to eat his eyeball, and he even commented on how delicious it was. But if I could ask one question, do the eye colors matter when it comes to like eyeball flavor? Like I got brown eyes, maybe that's like a maple-y kind of smoky kind of vibe. I don't know, maybe my eyes are pretty yummy. Somebody ask Army Hammer, see what he thinks about eyes. Number 4, Hulk vs everybody. Okay, this one's pretty wild. So Thor Ragnarok was loosely based off of the Planet Hulk storyline. And I say loosely because in the comics, well, that story didn't end up going so well. See, on Sakaar, the rocket that he arrived in ended up blowing to smithereens, causing some casualties that left him a little heartbroken, to say the least. So he rolls his shoulders back a few times, and then he heads back to Earth, and thus begins the World War Hulk storyline. He just destroys everybody. I mean, all the heroes that Earth loves at this point, just in the path of this death train. Like, he locks the Illuminati in Madison Square Garden, and then he makes them fight to the death. That in itself is brutal. That's crazy. But I mean, I guess if you spend enough time on Sakaar, that just becomes second nature, you know? The whole story is a bloody good mess. I mean, it's great seeing the panic on the Avengers' faces this entire time. It's scary. So make sure if you haven't already to grab all 5 issues of 2007's World War Hulk, because it's a treat. The whole thing's a big battle.
Number 3, The Punisher vs Sentry. During Dark Reign, Punisher refuses to stand by and let Norman Osborn become the world's new, biggest, and brightest hero, as S.H.I.E.L.D. is disbanded and Osborn becomes the head of its replacement organization, Hammer, and the new Dark Avengers team. Punisher aims to eliminate Norman Osborn, but standing in his way is the Sentry, who stops the Punisher's bullet mid-air as it soars towards Osborn's head. Sentry sets his sights on Frank, and well, I think you can imagine how this one goes. Still, at least this fight is gratifying in the sense that it isn't over with like a 1-2 punch. Instead, we actually watch as the Punisher tries everything he can to try to defeat Sentry, knowing it's pretty much all hopeless, but refusing to give up. And he does all this while being brutalized by Robert, who initially just wants to talk it out and arrest Punisher without a fuss. So that's how Punisher is actually able to survive, because Sentry just wants to talk. Punisher's skills and weapons aren't what save him actually at the end of the day. He simply manages to get lucky when Robert doesn't call out his get out of jail attempt at bluffing. Thank goodness. Number 2, Superman vs Alfred Pennyworth. You would think you already know how this fight would shake out, but hey, it didn't go down quite the way most of us would expect when it happened in Injustice. After Superman broke Batman's back with the good old Bane snap over the knee move, he had a brief moment of regret as Batman called him out for being more monster than hero, for torturing him, all while claiming it was for the greater good. As Superman considers what he's just done, he turns to Alfred, who has approached him. However, Alfred didn't approach Superman to, communicate any words of wisdom here or to help Clark come back around and regain his senses and see the error of his ways. He came to teach Superman a lesson about attacking Bruce. Alfred used a pill which temporarily granted him the same level of strength as Superman, making this super uneven fight on paper a lot more even in reality. Using the element of surprise, Alfred was then able to beat Superman to a pulp while confessing that he was very disappointed at him before scooping up Bruce and taking him to safety. Reminding everyone that even when it comes to facing powerful foes like Superman, Alfred is still and will always be a badass. In case people forgot. Number 1, Squirrel Girl vs Galactus. I freaking love this fight, and I love that I started this list with Squirrel Girl and I'm ending it with her, even though this fight is super ridiculous. You wouldn't think someone like Squirrel Girl, whose powers include communicating with and controlling squirrels and sharp teeth, would be able to take on and even defeat the epic force of Galactus, who is nigh unstoppable and comes armed with the Power Cosmic, which basically allows you to do, well, whatever writers need whoever wields it to do. Power Cosmic, by the way, turns out does help Galactus to communicate in the vacuum of space as well. In the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl issue 4, Squirrel Girl defeats Galactus by realizing that the only way to defeat him is by offering him an alternate planet to devour other than Earth. She and Tippy Toe manage to access the databases in his ship's computers and find one that is covered in nuts, which they manage to convince Galactus are delicious and nutritious, full of calories, life energy. As strange as this all sounds, the whole issue is pretty great when it comes to writing, so as weird as it sounds that Squirrel Girl was able to beat Galactus, it actually really makes sense in this context. And if you want to find out more about how this all actually happened, that Squirrel Girl beat Galactus, you can check it out in the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl issue for yourself.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Spider-Man, Jester, and Jack-O-Lantern. The MCU's Captain America's Civil War is much more tame than the comic book. For starters, in the comic, Peter sides with Tony until he realizes that Tony is spying on him, so he switches over to Cap's side. That didn't happen in the movie at all. So in the comic, this causes Stark to send out Jester and Jack-O-Lantern to go and fight Spider-Man. So Peter ended up getting his butt kicked to these guys, and it's all thanks to Stark. There's no chance also that Peter should have lost to them. Imagine if he didn't lose, the entire story would be so different. At first, the two thought taking orders from S.H.I.E.L.D. was a bum deal, as they put it, a bum deal. That is until they got the orders to fight Spider-Man, which they made very clear that they enjoyed doing. And before we continue on with this list, if you guys could go ahead and give us a thumbs up on this video, it helps the channel out a lot. We really appreciate it. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to our list. Number 9, Batman vs Guy Gardner. Okay, this one comes from Justice League issue 5, and it's commonly known as the punch. We have a punch and we have a slap. Now it's time to talk about the punch. So in this comic, Batman comes to take over the Justice League International, and Guy Gardner doesn't share the same enthusiasm as the rest of the team. So for more than one issue, he makes it very clear that he doesn't like this new leader. He's not a fan of the Bats. So naturally, a large conflict was growing, although Batman was clearly the better fit for the role. So he challenged Batman to a fight without the use of his power ring. Big mistake. And then Batman proceeded to knock him out with one punch. One punch, one punch. Yes, here we go. Blue Beetle even got pumped about it and started yelling, "One punch, one punch." Hence why it's a big thing now. This is an amazing moment and an even greater lesson rather, but a Green Lantern getting knocked out by a human punch should never happen, ever. Never. Don't start fights you can't win without the ring that makes you a superhero, or else you're just a guy in a suit. Pun intended. Number 8, Bruiser vs Wolverine. Runaways, issue 12. So we see Logan and Molly Hayes, aka Bruiser, have a rather quick exchange. Now at this time, Wolverine was a member of the new Avengers, and he's trying to get to the bottom of what happened to Dagger. So he, Cap, and Iron Man went to find help from the Runaways, seeing as the signs were leading to Cloak being responsible. So Molly is one of the strongest heroes ever, for sure. But how she handled Wolverine was almost a little bit too easy. So they walk into the cathedral, Cap calmly asks her to stop screaming, and that Wolverine and him are not going to hurt her. Laying the foundation. Good. Said very calm from a very calm man. This is good. The screaming continues, and Wolverine even asks if she's heard of heightened senses, and then gives her 3 seconds to stop drilling a hole into his brain. So he counts 3, 2, and then the next page we have outside face down Logan in the snow. Then when he comes back in, he's quite embarrassed about what just happened, even saying how he won't tell anybody tonight what happened if they don't, as he brushes off some snow. Number 7, Captain America and Sharon Carter. We go back now again to the Civil War comic book event where Captain America was killed by Sharon Carter. Yeah, after Crossbones sniped him, Agent 13, who was also at the time Cap's girlfriend, delivered the final bullet from a much, much closer point. Well, it turns out it wasn't Sharon who was doing the work, really. I mean, the classic brainwashing made this defeat happen. Dr. Faustus, yeah, this causes a whole chain of events. I mean, for starters, Bucky decides at that point that he should go and try and kill Iron Man, blaming him for the death of Steve Rogers. And then Falcon also goes after his own lead. Now, Tony ended up showing Bucky the letter that Cap wrote about how he should be the next Captain America, and Bucky agrees to take the spot only if he can operate solo. No shield, no nothing, I'm not working for you, I'm not punching in, I'm just doing my thing. And to think that all this came to a climax after Steve's girlfriend, of all people, was the one to deliver the fatal blow, it's just heartbreaking, and it's something that never should have happened. Number 6, Squirrel Girl and Dr. Doom. So Squirrel Girl has beaten some big bads in the Marvel Universe before. She's taken down MODOK, Mandarin, and at one point Thanos. It's becoming a running joke by now, but one defeat that always shocks me is when a bunch of squirrels took down Victor Von Doom. Just a bunch of squirrels. Yeah, it happened back in the 90s in Marvel Superheroes issue 8. So she bumps into Iron Man and then starts to show what she can do, alright? She's trying to give him a run for his money in order to show how rough and tough she really can be. So she shows him her mutant powers, like jumping, hopping, climbing, all like a squirrel. It's amazing. He's fascinated. She's even pumped to show him that she can also sound like a squirrel too, which, I mean, if you can do it, I would love to see that. Fair. But the most impressive of all these abilities has to be when an abundance of squirrels is commanded to jump onto Stark, and then enter Dr. Doom. Doom comes in and he interrupts Stark's electronics. So, in order to save Tony at this point, she needs to send a horde of squirrels onto the Doom ship. Just a horde of squirrels. As if they don't have, wives and kids to go back home. They have nuts to store and eat. They have things to do, right? And voila, Stark is free thanks to the insane squirrel posse. Then the rodents get their fur on Dr. Doom and he's forced to retreat and jump into nearby water. It's the best panel ever. He's like, squirrels? No way, man, I'm out of here. Good riddance, peace. And then he literally runs away and jumps. Like he's out of there. He wants nothing to do with that. One of those times you're happy the hero won, but like, squirrels. We have a lot of squirrels up here in Canada. I don't think they can take on Dr. Doom. They're pretty fat.
Number 5, The Punisher vs. Wolverine and Spider-Man and Daredevil. Now you might expect you know how this one should go, but let's also remember that this is Garth Ennis writing Punisher, so yeah. It doesn't really go down the way you'd think. Instead, the Punisher manipulates the 3 heroes briefly into turning against one another when they seek to bring him in. These 3 are hoping to team up to essentially arrest Punisher and then turn him over to the courts and, get him convicted with like the law and all of that stuff, even though Wolverine needs a bit of convincing when it comes to this approach at the beginning. Punisher takes out all 3 of these heroes, even managing to disable Spider-Man by convincing him that if he moves, bombs will go off. You'd think Spider-Man would actually be able to sense whether or not this was true, but I digress. I guess his spidey sense wasn't working that well that day. Number 4, Superman vs Batman. I mean, you'd think you know how this one should shake out, considering Batman is just a normal human with a bunch of money and, well, years of training. However, in Dark Knight Returns, we get to be pleasantly surprised. A normal man, even when as skilled as Bruce Wayne, you'd think would just be no match for Superman, especially as, well, he's getting on in years here, whereas Kal-El, while also being older, barely looks or seems to have aged at all. But Batman uses all of his strategic skills, knowledge, and his gadgets to help him win this fight. And man, does it go to show that you should never dismiss Batman just because he doesn't have conventional superpowers. Or superpowers at all. Batman has the best superpower, the superpower to know a ton about heroes because he does his homework.
Number 3, Spider-Man close to home. So when a supervillain escapes, it's not a great time. Usually they're going to come back for the person that put them in there in the first place. So Ultimate Spider-Man's death is absolutely beautiful, and of course it's really, really sad. It's done really well. So after tackling Captain America and literally taking a bullet for him, Peter is left to fight the Green Goblin, Electro, Sandman, Vulture, and Kraven. They are all waiting for him. They all wanted a piece of the spider, and in the end, they got what they wanted. The entire climax happens in Peter's neighborhood, basically. So everybody's running to safety and he's limping around. He's doing his absolute best. He's pulling off fire hydrants and using Electro's current to do some damage to other guys. He's giving it everything he's got. And that's the beauty of this one. He's exhausted from the start. He gets shot before this fight even happens. And you feel it while you're reading it. This is a plot that I think we're gonna finally see in the next Spider-Man movie. I mean, hopefully. With all these villains knowing Peter's true identity now, we could get them all literally showing up at his house, bringing the battle to him. Let's just hope it doesn't end the same way with Peter's heroic death. See, Miles actually saw this whole fight take place, so it actually inspired him to take on the mantle of Spider-Man. So these villains may have won this time, but Miles Morales is coming for you. Number 2, Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. This issue was released in August 2012, and it is exactly what it sounds like. So what's the story here? Why does Wade want everybody dead? Well, the X-Men put Wade into the Ravencroft Asylum in attempts to heal his insanity, but the doctor wasn't too good at handling a task because the doctor was actually Dr. Psycho Man. So the procedure went well, I'd say. You know, something happened. He brainwashed Wade in hopes to shut down all these inner voices, and well, it worked. Awesome, hooray, there we go. It worked, but the only downside was those voices were now replaced with voices that were encouraging him to kill everybody in the Marvel Universe. And this is a must read. From start to finish, it is brutal, it is graphic, it's an easy one on this list. Number 1, Iron Man vs Captain America. Seeing two of your friends argue is uncomfortable enough, let alone seeing two of your superhero friends try and kill each other. Captain America Civil War is one of my favorite Marvel movies to watch, because when these guys finally battle it out, there's years of history behind it. Captain America Civil War was released in 2016, directed again by the Russo brothers, and the whole movie is politics. It's superhero politics, like in the comic, minus, you know, most things from the comic, like the school blowing up, for instance. Let's leave that part out of this movie. But in the film adaptation, Tony sides with the government and the Sokovia Accords. He feels responsible for the death of Charles Spencer, or rather with the whole weekend of Ultron stuff. Steve wants to protect Bucky, and freedom throughout the entire team definitely wouldn't hurt either. So eventually, due to Baron Zemo's sneaky little snake work, he gets Tony in the same room as Steve, and we see footage of a brainwashed Bucky kill Tony's parents. The next 10 minutes are just filled with them both trying to end each other. Tony even blasted Bucky's arm off during this fight. He's going for blood. So Cap decides last minute to stick the shield in Tony's suit, and that shield Tony made very clear didn't belong to Cap, and that it belonged to his father.
Number 10, Magneto versus Red Skull. Magneto and the Red Skull are on opposite sides of history. Magneto grew up in a Jewish family living in Germany during World War II, and we all know Red Skull and Hydra's stance in World War II Germany, so it's safe to say that these two villains would almost never get along, right? In Acts of Vengeance from 1989, Magneto and Red Skull were actually temporarily united, but it's really important to note that Magneto was unsure whether this was the Red Skull that aided Germany in the slaughter of his people. So Magneto confronted him, and Red Skull confirmed that he was indeed the original. It didn't take much for Magneto, the master of magnetism, to overpower the Skull, but unlike what you might think, Magneto does not take his life. Instead, Magneto leaves the Skull isolated in a stripped down fallout shelter shelter 20 feet underground. He removed the ladder from the escape hatch, gave him 10 gallons of water, took out his homing transmitters, gave him no food and no light, just water, air, and his own depraved thoughts. Number 9. God King Doom vs Thanos. 2015's Secret Wars has Dr. Doom receiving the power of the Beyonders at the conclusion of Time Runs Out. The Latvian dictator is able to save reality from complete destruction at the hands of the Beyonders, stealing their power and merging all reality into a place called Battleworld, which he rules over as God Emperor. A few characters show up on Battleworld with their full memories intact, and they try to stop Doom and put things back to normal. One of them would be Thanos. Thanos, being the smug mad titan he is, decides to challenge Doom and refuses all of Doom's offers to work with him. So, in one quick movement, Doom plunges his hand into Thanos' chest, grabs a hold of his spine, and turns his body to ash, leaving one of the most amazing comic panels ever. Number 8. Joker vs Alexander Luthor Jr. The Joker has a special something that just no other villain can really stand up to. What is it? Popularity. People love the Joker. This magic word, popularity, allows the Joker to beat out other villains that in the real world he would never be able to take down. It also allows him to save the day on occasion. In 2005's Infinite Crisis, Earth 3's Alexander Luthor Jr. attempts to remake the multiverse into one perfect reality. Perfect for him at least. By the end, well, he fails, but he finds himself cornered by Lex Luthor and Joker of New Earth, which is the mainstream continuity. Joker pretty ruthlessly scars Luthor Jr. with acid and then brings his life to a sudden end with a bang. And it was all because Alexander didn't include him in his scheme in the first place.
Number 7. Wakanda vs Namor the Submariner. This fight targeted the entire, often mostly heroic nation of Wakanda. And what's more, it was another supposed hero, or at least anti-hero, doing the damage. This all went down during the Avengers vs X-Men event, with the Avengers said to have taken up refuge in Wakanda, and Namor being possessed by a piece of the Phoenix Force belonging at the time to the Phoenix Five. He decided to use his power to draw them out. How did he do this? Well, with a tidal wave that destroyed much of Wakanda, killed or hurt many of its people, and ended up causing a split between everyone's favorite couple, T'Challa's Black Panther and Aurora Monroe's Storm. Thanks for that, Namor. Namor!
Number 6. General Zod vs Captain Boomerang. Never put a captain up against a general. It will not go well. In 2016's Suicide Squad, in literally the second issue, Task Force X are sent on a mission to Russia to retrieve or destroy an unknown device. Turns out that device is actually a portal to the Phantom Zone. Rather than leave it be, Captain Boomerang approaches the portal and is literally incinerated down to his ankles instantly by none other than General Zod, who was trapped inside only to break free. I doubt the Boomerang guy would have been able to help much in the squad's fight against Zod. Honestly, it's a miracle any of them actually survived at all.
Number 5. Killer Croc vs Bane. Back in Batman issue 489, two heroes known for their strength and sometimes monstrous nature fought one another. And while they may have seemed more evenly matched on paper, one of them made quick work of the other. We are talking about the fight between Bane and Killer Croc, which happened in the pages of Batman back in the 1990s. While initially Killer Croc seems confident in this fight, things quickly turn south after Bane breaks his arm. From there, Bane continues to basically kick his butt and leaves him knocked out and bleeding amongst a pile of toys in the Eden Park Mall. The crazy thing was that Bane and Croc didn't even really fight because they had beef, but more because Bane wanted to face Batman. However, Bane leaves after discovering that the Batman he's come across here is not the true Batman, but Jean-Paul Valley.
Number 4. Kite Man vs Riddler's Army. Okay, I am a sucker for an underdog. In Batman Volume 3, there was the war of jokes and riddles between the Joker and the Riddler, surprisingly, each fueled by their desire to take Batman's life. Now, each of these lunatics had gathered up a group of villains to their side, and they caused a hell of a lot of damage to Gotham and its people in their war. One person caught in the crossfire would be Charles Brown. Charles became a mole for Batman in Joker's army, and when Riddler found out, he brought Charles's son to an end. Charles became Kite Man and joined up with the Joker to get revenge. With Batman's help, Riddler takes down Joker's army one by one, leaving only Kite Man, who is forced to switch sides. In the final climactic battle though, Kite Man helps Batman and Riddler's army infiltrate the Joker's holdout, and when the battle is won and the villains turn on Batman, Kite Man had a backup plan that allowed him to almost single-handedly incapacitate 8 of the biggest bads on Batman's rogues gallery, helping Batman save the day. Never underestimate Kite Man. Hell yeah.
Number 3. Marvel Universe vs Onslaught. When Marvel's heroes came up against Onslaught, it took all of them banding together, even joined by some villains, to stand a chance against him. And even then, this seemingly was not enough, with many heroes sacrificing themselves in order to defeat Onslaught for good. At first, we were made to believe that these heroes were dead, gone for good. That's how deadly the threat of Onslaught was. People were willing to lay their lives on the line. Fortunately, that's not exactly what happened, and instead, Franklin Richards, the child of Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic, and Susan Storm Richards, aka Invisible Woman of the Fantastic Four, was able to save the day. Despite his youth, Franklin at the time had immensely powerful reality warping powers, and used them without really even being super aware of it, kind of subconsciously, to safely stow Earth's heroes away in a pocket dimension. Onslaught would be defeated, the heroes saved, and shortly after they would make their return to the main reality of Earth 616. But still, we thought they were all dead, so it was a pretty big cost, it seemed at the time.
Number 2. Thanos vs Loki. Taking a break from comic books for a moment here, let's journey to the MCU. Loki is one of those characters who has elevated himself beyond the status of villain into a bit more of an anti-hero role, and the popularity of Tom Hiddleston's portrayal of the character is likely somewhat to blame for that. But popularity is not saving this character. In the opening of Avengers Infinity War, Thanos attacks the remaining Asgardians after the events of Ragnarok. Though they are Asgardians, he does seem to lay waste to them pretty easily. With Loki feigning allegiance to the Mad Titan, he makes a move against Grimace with a dagger only to be stopped, disarmed, and choked to death without the big bad even seeming to break a sweat, truly solidifying just how much of a threat Thanos is going to be. And in at number 1 is Thrag vs Dinosaurus. The Viltrumites from the Invincible comic series are a race of near invulnerable, incredibly strong, world-conquering aliens, but none among them stands as strong, as invulnerable as Grand Regent Thrag. Battle-hardened over thousands of years, only the most powerful characters can even hope to stand one-on-one against this powerhouse. David Anders, the villain known as Dinosaurus, is not one of those characters. While Dinosaurus is very strong, it's more his intelligence that is his greatest weapon. Dinosaurus allied himself with Invincible around issue 90 of the comics, and he would see Thrag attempt to take down Mark. Dinosaurus attacks Thrag, but his claws break on Thrag's skin. Thrag pummels the Dino Man, but he stops, distracted by an explosion, giving Dinosaurus the chance to chomp on his head, only for him to completely shatter his teeth, giving Thrag the chance to mock him and then break his jaw and leave him for dead. Luckily, Dinosaurus uses the opportunity to heal and escape with Mark.